Welcome to Come Follow Me, week 22, where we're looking at Mosiah chapters 25 to 28. And Mosiah chapter 25 is a bit of a nothing chapter, or at least it's kind of tying up some loose ends with regard to the records which we've just read about Zenith and Noah and Limhi. But it seems to actually create more questions than it answers. And this chapter starts out by telling you that the people are now combined and they're going to be called Nephites, even though actually the Mulekites are much larger. The people that were there with Mosiah is smaller than that, and the people who had come with Alma and from Limhi are even smaller than that, and they're not even half as much as the Lamanites. And the question is, how did you get such disparity of numbers? Particularly as we've seen, there's been these incredibly great wars where the Lamanites have been killed in massive numbers. So how come their population is so much bigger? And how come Mulek's population is so much bigger, considering they haven't even been in the Americas quite as long? And it's just a little bit of a hodgepodge. But it does make a lot more sense if you think of the people of Limhi being the Smith family and the Mulekites being the Hales family. And the Hale family is much larger, and it's got an extended Lewis family as well. And Mosiah's read, or actually it's been clarified, caused to be read, because of course kings shouldn't be just speaking out of turn, the records of Zenith and Noah and Limhi and Alma and their brethren, their afflictions. And the people are really amazed by these stories. And just like an adventure story, they're really excited about the deliverance out of bondage that God has done for them. And they're also worried about all those people who have died because of these wars. But it causes them to reflect and give thanks. And they're also worried about the Lamanites and the welfare of their souls. And this is going to dovetail into the missionary chapters that are going to come up next. But you also have this curious thing where you've got the children of Amulon who are then displeased with the conduct of their fathers and decide to take on the name of Nephi. Now, why have the children of Amulon come with Alma? We have no idea of this. This is a huge gap in the story, and we just don't know. And the Mulekites, or the people of Zarahemla, are united under Nephi as their king, so they've adopted Mosiah properly. But this seems to have already happened earlier in Mosiah, so I'm not sure why it's happening again here, but it's just a little bit tricky. And then also Mosiah is giving the information to Alma so that he can go preaching. Limhi wants to get baptized, and so Alma's able to do that for them. But also the idea of King Mosiah granting Alma that he might establish churches, and this seems kind of slightly odd in terms of the authority, because Alma seems to have authority already, but again, a few gaps. And so churches are being formed, and there's 7 churches, but they're all one church. They're all under the auspice of Alma. And so this seems to be the happy ending of everybody coming together and getting everything right with God and taking on the name of Christ. So let's have a look at Mosiah chapter 26, which is really kind of the first idea of administration of the church. What do you do with people as they grow in the gospel, and what happens when people turn away? There's first this understanding of a rising generation that doesn't understand God like their parents did. And this seems like a very common trope, the idea that as you get a bit older that you think that the younger people are not as diligent as you. And these young people didn't join the church, so they were separate from it, which suggests that actually this idea of baptizing people at 8 is not a part of this theology. And because they weren't baptized, they are kept in this carnal and sinful state, which suggests that Joseph at this particular time thinks of the fall as being our carnal nature and hasn't yet come to that understanding of a redemption. And this rising generation are deceiving people with their flattering words. They may be not understanding, or they're finding holes in the theology which are being presented, and so this is something that is becoming a problem. And Alma doesn't know what to do, so he sends them to the king, and the king basically sends them back. Presumably this is because of an idea of a separation of church and state. The state can, talk about crimes that are involved in the people, but the church needs to take care of any sinful things that Alma is worried, and so he sends these people to the king for judgment. And the king just sends them straight back to Alma because, of course, This is an idea of church and state, which is very much a part of early America, and the idea that the state might have a charge over crimes against each other, but not thought crimes. Anything that people believed had to be dealt with at an organizational level. And we see in these verses from 21 to 24 these really New Testament ideas that are being played out in Mosiah, and the idea that God is taking upon him the sins of the world. God is the Redeemer. Jesus is the Redeemer, because at this point, of course, God and Jesus are the same. And there are just so many of these New Testament isms that feature in this particular chapter. And forgiveness is available to people if they're willing to confess their sins. And so there's a bit of an inquisition here. And then if they are not willing to repent, they are going to be blotted out, so removed or excommunicated. And by this way, Alma's having a regulation over the church and trying to put it into a proper form. And of course, every organisation has to figure out where its boundaries are of where people are in and where people are out, and what happens when people are on those lines. But it is curious because Joseph is really concerned later about being cast out of churches. And so the idea that you might blot people out is a really interesting discussion. In Mosiah chapter 27, we see a continuation of the same kind of ideas from Mosiah chapter 26, but in a more practical element. The rising generation are actually characters now, and there is Alma, who's the son of Alma, and the 4 sons of Mosiah, who are the unbelieving children who are persecuting the church. The unbelievers are persecuting, and they're bringing that. The unbelievers are persecuting, and the members are bringing their complaints to Alma, and he's asking the king. What's really interesting about this is that Mosiah has other priests that we don't know about till this particular point. But he sends out a proclamation telling people that they're not allowed to persecute the people of God. And apparently this works because they have no persecutions and they've got equality among men. And we have this theme from King Benjamin, the idea that the labourer is worthy of his hire, that people, particularly priests, shouldn't get paid for doing priestly things, that just sows dissension. And we see from verse 6 that the people have got very numerous, and now they're branching out into all of the parts of the land, which is really curious because we don't have any interactions with Lamanites at this point. This doesn't happen until Alma, and so they're kind of a bit isolated, but they really shouldn't be. And we learn that Alma, the son of Alma, is one of those unbelieving children who's now persecuting the church, along with the sons of Mosiah, the king. And Alma's using flattery, and he's stealing away the hearts of the people. And if you see a correlation between Korihor in Alma chapter 30 and Sherem in Jacob chapter 6, you won't be wrong. And Alma is using flattery to steal away the hearts of the people. And if you can see a parallel here between Alma and Korihor, which is in Alma chapter 30, and Sherem, which is in Jacob chapter 7, you get an idea that these are actually the same stories and the same story arcs. And he's trying to destroy the church. And in the midst of this, an angel appears and stops Alma and the sons of Mosiah in their tracks and gives them a witness that God is in control and he's worried about them. God has heard the prayers of the people and of Alma. And so the angel shakes the earth to make sure that they know he's in charge. Alma is struck dumb and loses his strength, and he's carried helpless to his dad. They fast and pray for 2 days and 2 nights, and Alma recovers and has had this miraculous conversion experience. Verse 25 describes this as a born-again experience straight out of the New Testament. And verse 31 says that every knee shall bow and every tongue confess that, well, it should say Jesus is the Christ, but it just says him. But there's this very New Testament, King James Version, word for word understanding. And so in their repentant state, Alma and the sons of Mosiah go travelling through the land, telling about their conversion experience and making up for the harm that they've done. And Alma and the sons of Mosiah go throughout the land, preaching about their conversion experience and trying to undo the harm that they have done. And here we learn the 4 sons' names, and they are Ammon, Aaron, Omni, and Himnah. They're publishing peace. They're publishing good tidings of great joy. And this, of course, is every parent's hope, especially for children who are wayward, that if they pray hard enough, that their children's hearts would be softened by miraculous experiences which will help them to convert. And Joseph himself has had this conversion experience, and maybe he's now looking at himself in this light, that he was once the wayward child, and his mother particularly had prayed for him to have an experience, and now he's had it, and now he's stronger than ever, and he's going to lead. In Mosiah 28, the sons of Mosiah, from hearing about the plight of the Lamanites, want to go and preach to them. And so basically Mosiah tries to figure out whether this is right, and then he sends them off, and he gives all of the records to Alma, who is then responsible for all of this. But before he does so, he translates the Jaredite plates and gives an account, and so we'll have a look at that. The sons of Mosiah want to preach to the Lamanites because they want to cure them of their hatred towards the Nephites and a hope that they might become friendly to one another. But they're going with a lot of prejudice. Firstly, they think that the Lamanites are the vilest of sinners. And really, it's only God's gracious mercy that means that they're even still alive. So that's not a good basis by which you are going to do your missionary work. But it seems pretty common, the idea that we have the truth and you don't, and we're going to sacrifice ourselves so that you can get as good as we have. It's just an interesting, dynamic. And Mosiah petitions the Lord to ask him whether it's okay for his sons to do this and whether they'll be safe, and the Lord comes back to him and says that they're going to be delivered out of the hands of the Lamanites, and so they'll be safe. So this is a really interesting dynamic too, because Mosiah is acting like the prophet here, which he kind of is as a prophet king, and yet Alma's there beside him. So it's really interesting that we're looking at kind of the duality of Joseph here. Joseph is embodied in Mosiah and Alma. And so with that, the sons of Mosiah go up to preach to the Lamanites, and there's an editor note that there's going to be an account of their proceedings hereafter, so it kind of gives you an idea that this is going to be talked about. And we have this re-understanding about the two stones and the idea that this is the mechanism by which the records are translated and interpreted, that Mosiah has, and he's going to use them to bring forth the record of the Jaredites. And this is an exact mirror of what's happening to Joseph at this particular time, because he's got the seer stone and the hat, and he's translating the gold plates. So this is a way for him to inject his understanding, but also his legitimacy for doing this. And we learn that the plates that Mosiah is translating are from the Jaredites, that they come over from the Tower of Babel, that when the languages were confounded, and they're on their records as the understanding of the world right back to the creation of Adam. And Mosiah says that an account will be given of this hereafter. So this is what I think when Joseph and Oliver and Emma get to the Whitmer farm in Fayette, New York, and everybody is reading and listening to the Book of Mormon that's already been written, and they get to this point and they realize that this Jaredite record is not in the Book of Mormon. Joseph hasn't produced it yet, and so they're asking questions, and that sparks the Book of Ether, which is effectively what this becomes.